17 years of silence from my ruthless Uncle Silas shatters when a desperate, terrified phone call drags me into a deadly conspiracy involving his hidden leverage. Now, federal agents are converging on the lake house. My innocent wife is fleeing with the real evidence, and I'm realizing Silas's empire was built on something far more gruesome than leather. The silence from Uncle Silas wasn't just an absence of noise. It was a thick, suffocating blanket woven from years of deliberate neglect. For 17 years, my father's older brother, the self-made titan of artisanal leather goods, had existed as a ghost in our family tree. We'd send Christmas cards, stiff, impersonal things addressed to his sprawling estate in the hills, and receive nothing in return. No birthdays, no holidays, not even a polite acknowledgement when my grandmother passed away. We tried, for the first 5 years after the falling out, the details of which remain murky, something about a disputed inheritance and an alleged betrayal involving a rare saddle-stitching technique. But eventually, the phone calls stopped being returned. The emails bounced back, or worse, were read and ignored. He built his empire, Silas and Sons Fine Wares, on reputation and ruthlessness, and clearly we were no longer part of his profitable equation. My life moved on. I finished college, got a middling job in data entry, far from the grand, polished world Uncle Silas inhabited, and eventually settled into a quiet rhythm with my wife, Sarah. We bought a small house with a leaky faucet and a mortgage that felt like a physical weight on my chest. We didn't have much, but we had stability, something Silas, despite his wealth, never seemed to possess internally. I didn't miss him, not really. He represented the cold, hard edge of ambition, the kind of success that required you to cut ties with anything sentimental. Then came the Tuesday afternoon that shattered the calm of my spreadsheet-filled existence. I was staring blankly at a pivot table, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry hornets, when my phone vibrated. It wasn't my usual vibration pattern. It was a harsh, insistent buzz reserved only for calls from actual family members. My mother, my sister. I glanced at the screen. Unknown number. Probably a telemarketer trying a new spoofing tactic. I almost swiped it away, my thumb hovering over the decline button, but something made me pause. A strange, almost primal compulsion. I took a deep breath, wiping my sweaty palm on my jeans, and answered, my voice defaulting to professional politeness. Hello? The voice on the other end was raspy, aged in a way I hadn't expected, coated in an unfamiliar layer of desperation that scratched against the receiver. It took me a full, agonizing second to place the cadence, the slight, almost imperceptible aristocratic drawl that I hadn't heard since I was a child at a disastrous family picnic. It was Silas, Uncle Silas. Arthur? The name sounded like a foreign word on his lips. His voice cracked mid-syllable. Arthur, is that you? My blood ran cold. 17 years of silence, wiped clean by 2 simple words. I looked around the open plan office, half expecting my colleagues to hear this unbelievable intrusion. I lowered my voice, leaning against the cubicle wall, feeling suddenly dizzy. Uncle Silas, is everything all right? There was a heavy, rattling intake of breath on the line, the sound of someone fighting for air in a room suddenly too small. Then the dam broke. He didn't launch into excuses or pleasantries. He didn't ask about my mother. He skipped all the preamble of a long-lost relative reaching out. Instead, his voice dropped to a near whisper, laced with sheer terror. Arthur, he repeated, and this time the desperation was so raw it felt physically painful to hear. I need your help. I've lost everything. The banks have seized the factory, the lawyers. They are coming for the house tomorrow morning. Arthur, I don't know who else to call. They won't even let me access my own safe deposit box. You remember how meticulous I always was with paperwork? Well, it's all gone sideways. It's a disaster, son. A complete unmitigated disaster. I need someone on the outside to move something quickly. I need someone with clean hands. Can you do this for me? Because if you don't, Arthur, I swear to God, I won't just lose the business. I'll lose my freedom, and I know who's really behind this. I need you to go to the old boathouse, the one on the property near the lake. There's a loose floorboard under the workbench. Go tonight. There's a small, heavy box there. Bring it to me. Promise me you'll do it." I stared at the phone, my mouth dry. This wasn't the rich, untouchable uncle. This was a cornered animal begging for release. The mention of the boathouse, a place I hadn't thought about since childhood, sent a shiver down my spine. It was secluded, miles away from town, and the sheer urgency in his tone suggested something far more serious than a simple bankruptcy. "Uncle Silas, wait," I managed, my voice barely a croak. "What exactly is in that box? What did you do?" The line filled with static, a tearing, awful sound, followed by a choked gasp that sounded less like a human sound and more like a warning. "It's leverage, Arthur. Leverage against the men who think they own me now. You need to get it before they realize it's not in the safe. Don't ask questions, just get the box. But hurry, Arthur. I just heard a car pull into the drive. Heavy engine. They're early. I have to go. If I don't answer, assume the worst. Just tell me you'll go to the boathouse now." The line went dead. Not a click, not a dial tone, but a sudden violent severance of connection, leaving me holding my silent phone, the buzzing fluorescent lights suddenly the least of my worries. I looked at the time. 4:17 p.m. Sunrise was hours away, but I knew with chilling certainty that if I didn't leave right then, my uncle might not survive until morning. I grabbed my keys, slammed my laptop shut, and ran out of the office, leaving my professional life dissolving behind me as I headed toward the one place I swore I'd never return, the crumbling estate of the man who'd traded family for fortune. But as I pulled onto the highway, the GPS set for the desolate back roads leading to Silas's forgotten lake house, my phone vibrated again, a text message. It wasn't from Uncle Silas. It was an unknown number, simply displaying a single terrifying sentence. "We know you're coming for the box, Arthur. Stay away from the lake." The highway blurred beneath my tires as adrenaline began to pump through my veins, sharpening the world into hyperspeed focus. The text message was a physical blow, punching the air from my lungs. "We know you're coming for the box." Who were they? And how could they possibly know? Silas had just called me minutes ago, sounding trapped and isolated. If they were already aware of my involvement, it meant their surveillance was more extensive than Silas, the supposed master manipulator, had realized. Or worse, Silas hadn't been as careful as he thought when he arranged this clandestine exchange. I immediately pulled over to the shoulder, heart hammering against my ribs. I typed a desperate reply to the unknown number. "Who is this?" I waited, breath held tight in my chest, expecting a demand or a threat. The reply came back almost instantly, cold and brief. "Someone who wants that box more than Silas does. And we are watching you, Arthur. Turn around. Don't bring your innocent wife into this. Sarah." My stomach lurched. He had involved Sarah. That was the line. Silas, in his supposed desperation, had dragged my quiet, unassuming life into the crosshairs of whatever dangerous game he had been playing. I frantically called her. It went straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I pictured her at home, blissfully unaware, perhaps making dinner, and the thought of shadowy figures converging on our small, unprotected house made me physically ill. I had a choice. Obey the cryptic threat and abandon my uncle to whatever fate awaited him, or press on, knowing I was walking directly into a trap set by people who already had eyes on my life. The pragmatic part of me screamed to drive home, change the locks, and call the police. But the desperate inherited loyalty, the one part of the family I thought I'd escaped, was pulling me forward. Silas had mentioned leverage against the men who owned him. What kind of leverage required a clandestine pickup at a remote boathouse, guarded by people who sent anonymous warnings? The drive took nearly an hour, twisting deeper into the rural outskirts of the county, where the cell service dwindled to a single flickering bar. When I finally turned onto the crumbling gravel driveway of Silas's estate, the moon was high, casting long skeletal shadows from the ancient oaks lining the approach. The mansion itself, a monstrous Victorian edifice, was dark, silent, and looked less like a luxury home and more like a mausoleum. No lights were on. No cars were parked in the vast circular drive, which contradicted Silas's last panicked words about men arriving early. Had they already left? Or were they simply waiting in the dark? I parked my sensible sedan far down the driveway away from the house, hidden partially behind a dense cluster of rhododendrons. I cut the engine, and the sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the chirp of crickets. I slipped out of the car, pulling on the hoodie I kept in the trunk. I wasn't armed. I was an analyst, not an action hero. But I had a heavy-duty flashlight and a ridiculous amount of adrenaline. The boathouse was a separate structure near the edge of the overgrown lake, barely visible through the dense fog that seemed to materialize out of the stagnant water. It smelled of mildew, dead fish, and neglect. The door was heavy, warped oak, and when I pushed it, it groaned in protest, sounding like a creature waking from a long sleep. Inside, the air was thick and suffocating. Moonlight struggled through the single grimy window, illuminating cobweb-draped fishing gear, rusted tools, and the ghostly outline of a small, flat-bottomed rowboat. My heart hammered against my ribs again. This was it, the workbench. I found the spot easily. Beneath decades of sawdust and dried varnish, one section of the floorboards sounded hollow when I stomped on it. I fumbled for my utility knife, prying at the seam until the wood finally gave way with a splintering shriek. I angled the flashlight beam into the dark space beneath, and there it was. Not a small jewelry box, not a stack of bearer bonds, but a heavy, dark metal ammunition crate, secured with a thick, rusted padlock. It looked immensely substantial, far heavier than anything Silas would simply refer to as leverage. My hands trembled as I dragged it out. It scraped loudly on the concrete floor. I held the flashlight steady, trying to find a key, but Silas hadn't mentioned a key. He said to bring it. That implied it didn't need opening here. I turned the heavy box over, looking for markings. There were none, save for a single crudely scratched letter etched into the metal near the handle, an inverted V. As I wrestled the heavy crate toward the door, ready to make my escape, a sound cut through the night, distinct and terrifyingly close. It wasn't the crunch of gravel from the driveway. It was a low, rhythmic thump, 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 coming from the direction of the house, rapidly approaching. It sounded like heavy boots running on damp earth. They hadn't been waiting. They had been tracking me. I scrambled out of the boathouse, the heavy crate already tearing the skin on my palms. I looked back toward the mansion, but saw nothing in the moonlit darkness. The thumping stopped suddenly, replaced by a guttural, angry shout echoing from the shadows near the water's edge. "Drop it, Arthur! You've got 5 seconds!" I didn't know who they were, but they were armed, angry, and clearly not interested in negotiating. I was trapped between the water and the approaching figures. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, I hauled the crate a few more feet toward where I'd parked my car, but the ground was uneven, sloping toward the lake. The crate slipped, tilting dangerously, and as I lunged to steady it, the rusted padlock caught on a sharp edge of the floorboard I'd pried up, snapping the old metal with a sharp crack. The lid popped open a fraction of an inch, and a faint chemical smell, sharp, metallic, and strangely familiar, wafted out into the night air, followed by a low, internal hissing sound that made every instinct scream at me to run. Before I could slam the lid shut, a blinding, powerful beam of light from a tactical flashlight slammed into my eyes, momentarily paralyzing me, and a voice boomed directly behind me, too close for comfort. "Too late, boy. That wasn't Silas's leverage you were looking for." The tactical beam was searing, blinding me to everything but the white-hot point of light. I instinctively threw my arm up to shield my eyes, stumbling backward. The crate, the supposed source of Silas's leverage, teetered wildly, its lid gaping open just enough for me to glimpse the unsettling contents within. Not documents, not jewels, but something dull, metallic, and horribly arranged. That sharp metallic scent intensified, mingling with something acrid, like burnt wiring. "I said, drop it!" the voice barked again, closer this time. I could feel the heat radiating off the man, or men, now surrounding me in the oppressive darkness of the boathouse interior. My legs finally obeyed the panic signal. I let go of the crate, abandoning the heavy metal box entirely, pivoting to flee toward the lake, figuring the water offered better cover than facing these unseen assailants. But the ground beneath my feet was slick, wet earth mingled with lake muck. I slipped immediately, crashing hard against the doorframe. The loud, hollow thud was instantly followed by a second, sickening noise. The sound of the heavy ammunition crate falling completely open, spilling its contents onto the concrete floor with a terrifying clatter. The blinding lights swung away from my face, refocusing on the spilled contents. There was a stunned silence from the figures outside for one agonizing second, a silence far more terrifying than their shouts. They had clearly expected something different. "What in God's name is that?" someone whispered, the bravado gone from their tone. The acrid smell hit me full force. It wasn't just metal, it was decay, chemicals, and something profoundly unnatural. Squinting through watering eyes, I risked a look back. The flashlight beam revealed a disturbing tableau. The box hadn't contained documents or money. It was filled with dozens of small, carefully wrapped bundles of what looked like desiccated flesh, bound with frayed twine, interspersed with tarnished surgical tools and hypodermic needles. It looked like a serial killer's preserved trophy collection, or perhaps something far worse, something related to the illegal harvesting or trafficking Silas might have been involved in. This wasn't a bankruptcy. This was organized crime, or something even more sinister. Before I could process the horror of Silas's true business, the shock broke, and the men reacted with violent speed. A heavy boot slammed down inches from my head as one of the attackers rushed me. I threw a wild punch, connecting with something solid, a chest, perhaps. But it did nothing to stop the man. He grabbed my hoodie with one massive hand and spun me around, slamming my back against the rough wooden wall. "You idiot!" he snarled, his voice low and utterly devoid of emotion. "You weren't supposed to touch that. Silas was supposed to move it, not some random family errand boy." "I don't know what this is," I gasped, struggling against his grip, my lungs burning. "My uncle, he just called me." "Silas is long past calling anyone," the man stated grimly, yanking me forward until I was staring into the barrel of a heavy-caliber handgun that appeared out of the darkness. The sight of the cold, oiled steel made my mind go blank. He thought he could double-cross us, hide the real payment, and send a cleaner to retrieve it. Now you're caught in the crossfire. Just as the muzzle pressed firmly against my forehead, a new sound erupted from the darkness surrounding the estate, the distinct, unmistakable whine of powerful engines approaching rapidly, not on the gravel drive, but cutting through the fields from the direction of the lakeshore. The man holding the gun froze, his eyes darting past my shoulder toward the water. Damn it! Did he have a backup? Did he call them? "Who?" I managed to choke out. "The only people who care about this particular cargo more than we do," the attacker hissed, shoving me violently away from the door. "The feds!" The heavy thumping returned, but this time it was mixed with shouted commands. "Police! Drop your weapons! Hands where we can see them!" Chaos erupted. The man who had pinned me roared in frustration and scrambled toward the spilled contents of the crate, his companion firing a panicked shot into the darkness toward the approaching lights. My chance. I spun around, darting back toward the open doorway, the image of those grim, wrapped bundles searing into my mind. I scrambled out onto the damp earth just as the first harsh beams of official police spotlights swept across the boathouse clearing. I ran toward the cover of the trees, adrenaline fueling a desperate sprint. I glanced back one last time. 2 figures were visible in the flashing blue and red lights, the men who'd been inside. One was wrestling something bulky off the floor, clearly trying to conceal the evidence. The other was raising his weapon toward the encroaching police. Then, a new figure emerged from the shadows of the mansion. Taller, thinner, moving with a familiar, jerky gait. He wasn't running from the police. He was moving toward the men guarding the crate. It was Silas. He looked haggard, his expensive suit torn, but he was undeniably alive. He wasn't afraid of the police. He looked furious. As the police shouted warnings, Silas reached the 2 men struggling with the crate. Instead of joining them, he slammed his fist into the side of one man's head. Then, he snatched the weapon from the second man's grasp, and in a horrific tableau illuminated by the flashing lights, Uncle Silas, the patriarch of the failed leather empire, pointed the gun directly at the approaching law enforcement vehicles and fired 3 rapid shots. But Silas wasn't aiming at the police. He was aiming at the men he'd hired, the men who were supposed to retrieve the cargo for him. As the police returned fire, Silas wheeled around, abandoning the gun, and sprinted directly toward the only cover available, the dark, oily expanse of the lake. He plunged in without hesitation, disappearing beneath the surface just as the first volley of official return fire ripped through the air where he'd been standing. I was halfway to my car, breathing raggedly, when my phone finally buzzed with a new text message. It wasn't from the unknown number. It was from Sarah. I heard the sirens. What is happening? Arthur, there's a police car pulling up to our house right now. They're flashing their lights. What did you get yourself into? Sarah's text was a direct hit, bypassing the adrenaline shielding me from the scene at the lake and slamming me back into the terrifying reality of my own compromised life. Police at our house. Silas hadn't just been evading some local thugs. He'd been entangled with people whose reach extended all the way back to my quiet suburban street. And now the authorities were following the breadcrumbs, or perhaps the distraction, he'd left behind. I abandoned the path to my car. The woods offered a slim chance of cover, but I needed to reach civilization, needed to warn Sarah, needed to know what they wanted from her. I plunged into the thicket, ignoring the stinging branches whipping my face, moving parallel to the lake, hoping the ongoing chaos near the boathouse, the gunfire, the shouting, the police swarming the scene, would provide enough cover for my escape. Behind me, the sounds of the confrontation devolved into harsh arrests and the sickening scrape of equipment being secured. I didn't dare look back to see if Silas had survived his desperate plunge into the murky water. The image of him shooting his own hired muscle before diving in, the ultimate act of a man cutting every tie, was burned into my retinas. I finally broke through the tree line about a quarter-mile down from the main driveway, finding the narrow, rarely used service road that bypassed the front gates. I started running, my lungs burning with the metallic taste of exertion and fear. I couldn't use my phone to call Sarah back. If the police were already at our house, they were likely monitoring or tracking incoming calls. I needed to get home, intercept them, and somehow talk my way out of a situation that smelled increasingly like federal jurisdiction, not a local disturbance. As I reached the main paved road, I saw the Cruiser, a standard, unmarked sedan, parked directly in front of my small house, its lights off, looking ominously patient. 2 uniformed officers stood near the porch, speaking grimly into their radios. They hadn't entered yet. They were waiting, perhaps for backup or for official confirmation that the perimeter at the Silas estate was secured. I circled wide, using the neighbors' dark hedges for cover, trying to formulate a plan that didn't involve me being tackled and zip-tied next to a crate of human remains. If they knew I was connected to the estate, I was finished. I was the one Silas had asked to retrieve the box. I ducked behind a thick maple tree just as one of the officers on my porch looked up, scanning the street. He hadn't seen me yet, but the gesture signaled their heightened alertness. Then my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Sarah or the anonymous threat. It was my mother. She never called unless there was a genuine crisis, and her contact information always bypassed my silent mode. My hands shaking, I fumbled the phone out of my pocket, praying I could answer without the sound echoing in the night. "Mom? What is it?" I whispered, crouching low behind the maple. Her voice was strained, thin with panic that mirrored my own, but focused on a different dread. "Arthur, thank God you answered. I heard the news reports, the police activity at Silas's place. They are calling it a raid, Arthur, a major operation, but that's not why I called." "What is it, Mom? Did you talk to Silas?" "No, Arthur, Sarah called me 20 minutes ago. She was frantic, said she got a strange message, not from you, but from your office line. She said a man claiming to be from the Department of Commerce called, saying you were being brought in for questioning regarding a massive corporate espionage investigation connected to Silas and Sons. She panicked Arthur. She packed a bag and took off in your spare car, the old blue hatchback, saying she was going to drive straight to your sister's place upstate to wait for you. The blood drained from my face. My office line? That meant they hadn't just been watching me. They had infiltrated my workplace. They weren't waiting for me to confess. They were already dismantling my alibi. And Sarah, my steady, predictable Sarah, had fled, making herself look exactly like a panicked accomplice fleeing justice. "Mom, no," I breathed, the sound catching in my throat. "She shouldn't have left. They'll flag the car." "Too late, sweetheart," Mom sobbed quietly. "I just got another call, a blocked number. They told me Sarah's car was spotted heading north on I-95 about 10 minutes ago, and they told me this: if I didn't make sure you didn't contact her, they would make sure the authorities found her first. They said she's now holding something of theirs, too." I felt a cold wave wash over me, colder than the lake water Silas had embraced. The crate at the boathouse was just a decoy, or perhaps a secondary stash. Silas hadn't just needed leverage for himself. He had inadvertently or deliberately implicated my wife. The leverage the men were hunting wasn't the grotesque collection of items I'd seen. It was something Sarah was unknowingly carrying away from our home. I stood up slowly from behind the maple tree, the reality of the situation crushing me. I was trapped between two converging threats: the armed men and potentially federal agents who had been at the lake, and the police now surrounding my house, believing my wife was a fugitive carrying evidence related to a conspiracy. I had to reach Sarah before anyone else did. I took a single, decisive step away from the safety of the shadows, intending to circle around the back of the property and try to slip past the officers guarding the front door to grab my own keys and call her somehow. But as I cleared the edge of the yard, a shadow detached itself from the darkness beside my neighbor's garage. Not a police silhouette, but a figure moving with unnerving stealth, too low to the ground. Before I could register the danger, a thick, chemically soaked rag was clamped hard over my mouth and nose, cutting off my scream before it even formed. The overpowering scent that flooded my senses this time was unmistakable: chloroform. My last conscious thought was the horrifying realization that the men who were tracking Silas, the men who had been watching the boathouse, hadn't been interested in the police raiding the scene. They had been interested in the contingency plan, and they had just executed it flawlessly, grabbing the innocent party, my wife, and now me. As the world dissolved into swirling blackness, the last thing I heard was the muffled, distant sound of the police officers at my front door finally kicking in the door, shouting Sarah's name into an empty, waiting house. Darkness didn't just return. It swallowed me whole. A thick, suffocating fluid that held me suspended in a terrifying, silent void. When consciousness flickered back, it was not to the sterile clarity of a hospital, but to a heavy, dull throbbing behind my eyes and the distinct scent of diesel and damp burlap. I was moving. The rocking motion suggested a vehicle, probably a van or a truck given the cramped space. I tried to move my hands, realizing they were bound tightly behind my back with industrial zip ties that bit painfully into my wrists. My mouth was gagged, the chemical residue of the chloroform still clinging faintly to my throat. Panic was a useless energy. I conserved my strength, listening. The engine noise was constant, and I could faintly hear low, unintelligible voices from the front of the vehicle. They hadn't killed me. Not yet. This meant I, or perhaps Sarah, still held the key to whatever true leverage Silas had hidden. The realization that Silas had two contingency plans, the decoy box at the boathouse and whatever Sarah was carrying, was the only thing keeping my mind sharp. The vehicle finally slowed, the engine idling roughly before cutting out entirely. A door slammed and I was roughly hauled out. The air was cold, sharper than the night at the lake, suggesting a more industrial, perhaps coastal setting. I was dragged across rough concrete, the sound of heavy machinery humming nearby. When they finally pulled the gag from my mouth, the air tasted like rust and sea salt. I blinked against a single harsh work light hanging from a steel girder overhead. I was in a massive, cavernous warehouse filled with stacked shipping containers. The two men from the boathouse stood over me, their faces revealed now in the stark light. hard, professional, and clearly working for someone far higher up the food chain than Silas. "Welcome back, Arthur," the first man, the one who had spoken to me at the lake, said with a grim smile. "Your uncle was sentimental. Thought he could trade pieces of his past, his dirt, for his future. We let him swim for a bit. Gave us time to secure the real assets." "Where is Sarah?" I rasped, fighting to keep my voice steady despite the terror. "Your lovely wife is safe. For now," the second man chimed in, leaning in conspiratorially. "She's parked in a nice quiet storage unit across the way. She truly made our job easy, driving right to the location we wanted her to think was safe. She thinks she's hiding out at your sister's, but she's 3 miles from here. And she's holding the package, isn't she? The one Silas told her to take if he didn't call her back by dawn?" The pieces clicked violently into place. Silas, knowing his downfall was imminent, hadn't told me about Sarah's role. He'd called me to create a diversion at the boathouse, knowing the attention would shift to the gruesome decoy, while Sarah, following his contingency instructions, took the real leverage. A package he'd hidden in our home, something so vital the feds and these organized criminals were both interested. "She doesn't know what she has," I argued, desperately trying to buy time. "She thinks it's just his old ledgers, documents." The first man laughed, a harsh, dry sound. "Oh, Arthur, Silas didn't just deal in leather. He dealt in secrets. The ledgers she has, they aren't about saddles. They're hard drives detailing every shell corporation, every offshore transfer, and every politician he ever blackmailed over the last 20 years. The real value isn't the money. It's the power vacuum his collapse creates. And we are here to inherit that power." He gestured toward a heavy locked steel door set into the back wall of the warehouse. "We need those drives to stabilize the transition before the feds, who, by the way, are still busy chasing Silas's corpse in the lake, can move in. You are going to call your wife. You are going to tell her to bring the package here, or we send you to join your dear uncle in the murky depths." I knew I couldn't risk Sarah coming here. If she arrived with the drives, we would both disappear forever. I had to create a new diversion, one that leveraged the chaos still unfolding miles away. "I can't call her from here," I said, injecting a note of genuine resignation into my voice. "They'll trace the call immediately. You have to take me to a burner phone, drive me close enough to call her line, and I'll tell her to meet us somewhere neutral." The two men exchanged a look, a flicker of calculation. It was a risk, but bringing in a hostage negotiator would be slower. They needed the drives now. "Fine," the leader conceded, reaching for a heavy key ring. "But you make one wrong move, one signal, and we dump you in one of those containers and weld it shut." They unbound my hands and shoved a burner phone into my grasp. They drove me 10 tense minutes in the back of their van, the silence broken only by the heavy breathing of my captors. We pulled over near a deserted industrial park, far from the lake estate, but close enough, I realized with a jolt, for Sarah's frantic drive north to have ended here, having assumed this was the safe house location she was aiming for. I dialed Sarah's number. It rang 4 times before she answered, her voice thin and tight with fear. "Arthur, where are you? I'm here. I got to the address you gave me, but—" "Sarah, listen to me," I cut in, my voice low but authoritative, masking the fear with the tone I used when running a critical data migration. "Don't move. Do not get out of the car. You are not safe. The people who called you? They are not cops. They are the ones who took Silas." A sharp intake of breath on the line. "The things in the box, Arthur, the files." "I know," I hissed. "I saw the decoy. Now, Sarah, this is critical. Don't bring the drives here. Do you remember the spare key I keep hidden in the headlight casing of the blue hatchback?" "Yes. It opens the safe deposit box at the First National downtown. The one Silas insisted we open years ago, the one we never used. Go there. Right now. Wait inside the lobby. Do not hand anything over. If they find you before you get there, tell them you need to speak to a lawyer and you want immunity for Silas's crimes in exchange for the full transfer of control of the assets. Do you understand? Go to the bank, Sarah. Now drive." I hung up before they could stop me, tossing the burner phone onto the asphalt. I looked at the two men, a grim smile finally breaking through my terror. "She's going to the bank," I told them. "Your move, gentlemen." The leader, furious, lunged for me, but the van door flew open, and the second man yelled, "Boss, we've got incoming, not police, an unmarked convoy, heavy armored vehicles. They look like private security, but not ours." Suddenly, the air filled with the deafening sound of approaching sirens, not the familiar wail of local police, but the high-pitched, unfamiliar shriek of high-level federal response units, converging rapidly on our position, clearly tracking the location of the burner phone I had just used. Silas hadn't just set up a decoy, he'd set a delayed trap, banking on his enemies fighting over his remains, while the real prize, the financial evidence, was moved to the one place they couldn't immediately touch it, a regulated financial institution. The two men looked at me, then at the road, realizing they were caught between the agents hunting Silas's illicit biological materials, which were probably now being analyzed by the first wave of police, and the massive force now closing in on their illicit storage facility, all while Sarah was heading straight for the jurisdiction of the SEC and the Treasury Department. The lead operative didn't hesitate. He shoved me hard against the van's side, drawing his sidearm. "You think you saved her, kid? You just signed both your death warrants." He raised the weapon, aiming not at me but toward the approaching sirens, preparing for a last stand in the warehouse. But just as his finger tightened on the trigger, a massive black SUV, moving with impossible speed, slammed broadside into the passenger side of their van, crushing the driver's door inwards with a horrific screech of metal. The impact threw the lead operative violently against the steel container next to me. Dazed, I looked out the ruined doorframe. The SUV was not police. It was sleek, windowless, and bore no insignia. Men in crisp, dark suits, not tactical gear but expensive tailoring, poured out, moving with unnerving precision, already securing the bewildered agents who had been hunting Silas. One of these new arrivals, radiating an air of quiet, terrifying authority, approached me. He wasn't armed with a gun, but with a pristine manila folder. "Arthur Davies?" he asked, his voice smooth, cultured, and utterly devoid of emotion. "We are here on behalf of an expedited governmental oversight committee. Your uncle's assets are now frozen, pending an immediate and comprehensive review. We were aware of his contingency plans. Your wife is safe, though we will need to interview her regarding the data drives. As for you..." He paused, tapping the folder against his palm, his eyes fixing on mine with cold intensity. "As for you, Mr. Davies, you are now the only uncompromised link to the infrastructure Silas built. We have a proposition for you. You helped us retrieve the assets from the diversion site. Now, you're going to help us secure the real evidence before your uncle's overseas partners mobilize. Cooperate and we offer you full witness protection and immunity. Refuse and you'll be charged as an accessory to the contents of that boathouse. Where do you want to start, Arthur? The bank or the interrogation room?"